Jake Morrison was cleaning his rifle when the message came through. He had been on patrol duty for 3 weeks aboard the human ship UES Liberty, floating somewhere near the edge of known space. The days had been boring with nothing but empty stars and routine checks of their equipment. The communication officer, Amy Chen, walked over to his bunk with a strange look on her face. Her hands were shaking slightly as she held the data pad. "Jake, you need to see this," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Jake put down his rifle and took the pad from her. The screen showed an official message, but not from Human Command. The symbols were different, flowing and curved like water frozen in time. At the top was a seal he recognized from their alliance meetings with the alien empire called the Keth-Morans. "Can you read this?" Jake asked. Amy shook her head. The computer translated it. "You're not going to believe what it says." Jake pressed the translation button. The alien text changed to English words that made his stomach drop. To Lieutenant Jake Morrison of the Human Fleet by order of Her Imperial Majesty Queen Zelnara of the Kethan Empire. You are commanded to appear before the royal throne for private audience. Transport will arrive at your current location within 6 hours. This summons cannot be refused or delayed. Signed Lord Commander Vexer. Royal Guard. Jake read the message 3 times. Each time the words stayed the same. An alien queen wanted to see him. Not as captain. Not as admiral. Him. A simple lieutenant who had only been in space for 4 years. "This has to be a mistake," Jake said. Amy grabbed his arm. "Jake, this came through official channels. The security codes are perfect. This is real." Other crew members had started to gather around them. Word traveled fast on a ship like the Liberty. Soon, half the crew was staring at Jake like he had grown a second head. Captain Lisa Hayes pushed through the crowd. She was a tough woman who had served in space for 20 years. Jake had never seen her look worried before today. "Morrison, my ready room." "Now," she said. Jake followed her through the narrow corridors of the ship. The Liberty was not a big vessel. It carried only 200 crew members and was designed for patrol work, not battles. The captain's ready room was small with just enough space for a desk and 2 chairs. Captain Hayes closed the door and turned to face him. "Jake, I've been in the fleet for 2 decades. I've fought pirates, explored new worlds, and dealt with first contact situations, but I've never seen anything like this." She sat down heavily in her chair. "Do you have any idea why the alien queen would want to see you?" Jake shook his head. "No, ma'am. I've only had contact with KTH Morin 3 times. Once during the joint training exercise on Europa Station, once when we helped evacuate civilians from the Plague Worlds, and once during the battle at Proxima Station." "Tell me about Proxima Station," Captain Hayes said. Jake felt uncomfortable talking about that day. It had been 3 years ago, but he still had nightmares about it. "We were part of a task force protecting evacuation ships. The plague had infected an entire fleet, and they were heading for civilian targets. The plague was something that still scared both humans and Catherines. It was a disease that could take over entire ships, turning the crew into something else, something hungry and violent. Both species had worked together to fight it, but the cost had been enormous. My ship, the destroyer USS Ranger, took heavy damage," Jake continued. "We lost main power and most of our weapons. Captain Torres was killed when the bridge took a direct hit." Captain Hayes leaned forward. "You were acting commander after that?" "Yes, ma'am. For about 20 minutes. Jake's voice was quiet now. The plague ships were closing in on the evacuation convoy. 1,800 civilians were trying to reach the jump point to safety. Jake stopped talking. The memories were still hard to deal with. "What did you do, Lieutenant?" "The only thing I could do. Our ship was dying anyway, so I ordered full power to the engines and rammed the lead plague vessel. It bought the evacuation ships enough time to escape. Captain Hayes was quiet for a long moment. How did you survive? The escape pods launched just before impact. Most of the crew made it out. We lost 43 people that day. The captain nodded slowly. And you think this might be related to why the Queen wants to see you? I don't know, ma'am. Maybe. There were Catherine ships in that battle, too. But I never met any of their crew personally. A soft chime came from the ship's communication system. Captain Hayes pressed a button on her desk. Captain, we have an alien vessel approaching, came the voice of the bridge officer. It's transmitting Catherine Royal codes. Captain Hayes stood up. They're early. Jake, I want you to pack a bag, bring dress uniforms, and anything else you might need for a formal meeting. Ma'am, what if this is some kind of trap? It's not, Captain Hayes said firmly. The Catherines have been our allies for 3 years. They don't play games with diplomatic immunity. If their queen wants to see you, she has a good reason. Jake went back to his quarters and packed quickly. His hands were shaking as he folded his clothes. Other crew members kept stopping by his door to wish him luck or ask questions he couldn't answer. Amy Chin appeared in his doorway just as he was closing his bag. Jake, are you scared? He thought about lying, but Amy had been his friend since training academy. Terrified, he admitted. The whole crew is talking about this. Some of them think you're in trouble. Others think you're about to become famous. I just want to do my duty and come back home, Jake said. An announcement came over the ship's speakers. Lieutenant Morrison, please report to Docking Bay 2. Transport is ready for departure. Jake picked up his bag and walked toward the door. Amy grabbed his sleeve. Jake, whatever this is about, remember that you're representing all of us, all of humanity. The corridor to the docking bay felt longer than usual. Crew members lined the walls watching him pass. Some nodded, others gave him thumbs up. A few looked worried. The docking bay was filled with people. Captain Hayes was there along with the senior officers. They all watched as Jake approached the alien transport ship. The Catherine vessel was beautiful in a way that human ships were not. Its hull seemed to be made of some kind of crystal that glowed with soft blue and green light. It was about the size of a shuttle, but clearly built for important passengers. A door opened in the side of the ship and 2 Keith Marin guards stepped out. They were tall, about 7 feet, with 4 arms and skin that looked like polished stone. Their large eyes were dark and seemed to see everything at once. One of the guards spoke in their musical language. A translation device on his chest converted the sounds to English. Lieutenant Morrison, I am Commander Rextel of the Royal Guard. I am here to escort you to Her Majesty. Please come aboard. Jake looked back at Captain Hayes one more time. She gave him a small nod. Represent humanity well, Lieutenant, she said. Jake walked toward the alien ship, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what waited for him on the other side of this journey. All he knew was that an alien queen had requested to see him, and he was about to find out why. As he stepped aboard the Catherine transport, the last thing he heard was the crew of the Liberty cheering for him. Then the door closed, and his normal life was left behind. Jake stepped inside the Catherine transport ship and immediately felt like he was in a different world. The walls glowed with soft light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The air smelled like flowers he had never encountered before. Sweet, but not too strong. Commander Rextel gestured toward a chair that looked like it was grown rather than built. Please sit, Lieutenant Morrison. The journey will take 6 hours. Jake sat down carefully. The chair adjusted itself to fit his body perfectly, which was both comfortable and strange. Through the clear walls of the ship, he could see the Liberty getting smaller as they moved away. Commander, Jake said. Can you tell me why the Queen wants to see me? Rexel's 4 arms moved in what Jake had learned was a gesture of respect among the Catherines. I am sorry, Lieutenant. I have orders not to discuss the reasons for your audience. What I can tell you is that this meeting is very important to Her Majesty. Another Keithan entered the cabin. This one was smaller than Raxtel and wore different colored clothing. The translator on his chest clicked to life. I am Healer Mortex. I am here to make sure you are comfortable during the journey. Do you need food or water? Jake realized he was hungry. He had been too nervous to eat before leaving the Liberty. Yes, please. If you have anything humans can eat. Mortex made a sound that the translator said was laughter. We have studied human dietary needs extensively since our alliance began. We have prepared meals that your people find tasty. He brought Jake a tray of food that looked surprisingly familiar. There was something that looked like bread, fruits that were almost like apples and meat that tasted like chicken. Jake ate slowly, still feeling nervous about what waited for him. This is very good, Jake said. Thank you. You are welcome, Mortex replied. Tell me, Lieutenant Morrison, have you had much contact with our people before? Jake swallowed a piece of the bread-like food. Not much. I was part of some joint training exercises, and I fought alongside Keith Moran's ships during the Plague Wars. Both aliens became very still when he mentioned the Plague Wars. Their large eyes seemed to focus on him more intensely. You fought in those battles? Rextel asked. Yes, my ship was part of the task force that defended the civilian evacuation convoys. The two Cath Moran exchanged looks. They spoke to each other in their own language too quickly for the translators to keep up. Jake caught a few words that sounded important, but he could not understand them. Forgive us, Rexel said. The Plague Wars were a difficult time for both our peoples. Many heroes were made during those dark days. Jake finished his meal and looked out at the stars flowing past them. The Ctheran ship moved much faster than human vessels. Space seemed to bend around them as they traveled. How much longer until we reach the Queen's ship? Jake asked. For more hours, Rextel replied. Would you like to rest? We have prepared sleeping quarters for you. Jake shook his head. I don't think I could sleep right now. I'm too nervous. Mortex sat down across from him. It is natural to feel nervous before meeting royalty. But I can tell you that Her Majesty is fair and wise. She would not have called for you without good reason. That's what worries me, Jake said. I can't think of any good reason why an alien queen would want to meet with me specifically. Perhaps, Rextel said carefully. You have done something important that you do not realize was important. Jake thought about this. His life had been fairly ordinary for a space fleet officer. He had followed orders, done his job, and tried to keep his crew safe. Nothing seemed important enough to interest royalty. Can you tell me about the Queen? Jake asked. What is she like? Mortex's expression changed to something that looked like deep respect. Her Majesty Zelnara has ruled our empire for over 200 years. She is known for her wisdom and her ability to see connections that others miss. 200 years. Jake was surprised. How long do your people live? Much longer than humans, Rextel explained. The Queen is still considered young by our standards. She has many years of rule ahead of her. Jake tried to imagine living for hundreds of years. It seemed impossible from a human perspective. What else should I know about meeting her? When you are brought before Her Majesty, you should bow slightly, but not kneel unless she asks you to. Mortex said, speak clearly and honestly. The Queen values truth above all else. And do not be surprised if she knows things about you that you did not expect her to know. Rexel added, Her Majesty makes it her business to understand the people she meets with. This made Jake even more nervous. What could the Queen possibly know about him? His military record was not secret, but it was not particularly impressive either. He was just a lieutenant who had done his duty during a bad situation. The hours passed slowly. Jake tried to read a book on his personal data pad, but he could not concentrate. He kept thinking about all the things that might go wrong. What if he said something offensive by accident? What if this was all a misunderstanding and he was not supposed to be there? More techs brought him more food and something to drink that tasted like tea. The warm liquid helped calm his nerves a little. Lieutenant Rexdale said, "May I ask you about the battle at Proxima Station?" Jake looked up from his drink. "What do you want to know?" "You commanded a human destroyer during that battle only for a few minutes after our captain was killed. I was the senior surviving officer and your ship was badly damaged." Jake nodded. "We lost main power, most of our weapons and half the crew. We were basically dead in space. But you did not surrender or retreat. There was nowhere to retreat to. And the plague ships were closing in on the civilian transports. 1,800 people were trying to escape to the jump point." Rextel leaned forward. "So, what did you do?" Jake was quiet for a moment. Talking about that day always made him feel sad and proud at the same time. "I ordered the helmsman to point us at the biggest plague ship and give me everything the engines had left. We ran them at full speed. You sacrificed your ship to save the civilians. It was already lost. At least this way, it meant something." Both aliens stared at him with their large, dark eyes. Jake felt uncomfortable under their gaze. "Was that wrong?" he asked. "Did I violate some kind of protocol?" "No," Mortex said quietly. "It was not wrong." Rextel stood up and moved to one of the ship's windows. "Lieutenant Morrison, in 1 hour, we will reach the Eternal Dawn, Her Majesty's flagship. When you see it, you will understand the power and glory of our empire." Jake joined him at the window. In the distance, he could see a massive shape blocking out the stars. As they got closer, he realized it was not one ship, but many ships arranged around a central structure that was bigger than anything humans had ever built. "That is the Eternal Dawn?" Jake asked. "The Central Palace." Yes, the smaller ships around it housed the royal court, the government ministries, and the fleet commanders. The structure was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. It looked like a crystal castle floating in space with spires that stretched for kilometers in every direction. Lights danced across its surface like living things. "How many people live there?" Jake asked. "Nearly 1 million, Rextel replied. It is a city among the stars." As their small transport approached the massive royal ship, Jake felt smaller and more insignificant than ever before. Whatever the Queen wanted with him, he was about to find out. The docking process took almost an hour. Jake watched through the transport's windows as they moved slowly through a maze of crystal corridors and chambers inside the Eternal Dawn. Other ships were docking and leaving constantly. The activity reminded Jake of a busy spaceport, except everything was much larger and more beautiful than anything humans had built. When their transport finally stopped, Jake felt his stomach tighten with nervousness. Commander Raxtel stood up and straightened his ceremonial armor. "We have arrived, Lieutenant Morrison. Are you ready?" Jake picked up his small bag and nodded. "As ready as I can be." The door of the transport opened with a soft musical sound. Jake stepped out onto a platform made of the same glowing crystal as the ship's hull. The air here was warmer than on the transport, and it smelled like ocean breezes. 2 more Kethran guards were waiting for them. These wore different armor than Rextel, with more decorations and brighter colors. One of them stepped forward and spoke. "Lieutenant Morrison, I am Captain Zark of the Palace Guard. I will escort you to your quarters where you may rest and prepare for your audience with Her Majesty." Jake followed the guards through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. The walls were transparent in places, giving him views of the space around the flagship. He could see dozens of other ships, some human, but mostly Kethan, all arranged in careful formations. Other aliens walked through the corridors, but they were different from his escorts. Some wore flowing robes instead of armor. Others had different colored skin or additional arms. Jake realized that the Keithan Empire included many different species, not just the Keithans themselves. "Captain," Jake said as they walked, "how many different species are part of your empire?" 47 at last count, Zark replied. "Her Majesty rules over many worlds and many peoples. All are welcome in the empire if they follow our laws and customs." They passed through what looked like a market area where aliens of various types were buying and selling goods. Jake saw foods he did not recognize, tools that seemed to be made of living metal, and clothing that changed colors as he watched. Several aliens stopped what they were doing to stare at Jake as he passed. Some pointed at him and spoke to each, other in languages his translator could not handle. A few bowed slightly, which confused Jake completely. "Why are they doing that?" he asked Zark. "Word travels quickly in the palace. Everyone knows that Her Majesty has summoned a human for private audience. This has not happened before." They entered a lift that moved not just up and down, but sideways and diagonally through the ship. Jake's stomach lurched as they changed direction several times. Through the transparent walls of the lift, he could see the inside of the Eternal Dawn was even more complex than the outside suggested. "How big is this ship?" Jake asked. "The main structure is approximately 50 kilometers long and 30 kilometers wide," Zark said. "But the palace grows larger every year as new sections are added." Jake could hardly imagine something so large. The biggest human ships were only a few kilometers long. This was like a floating city that could travel between stars. The lift finally stopped and the doors opened onto a corridor lined with what looked like gardens. Plants that Jake had never seen before grew in careful patterns along the walls. Some of them seemed to glow with their own light, while others moved gently even though there was no wind. "Your quarters are here," Zark said, stopping in front of a door that had no visible handle or lock. The door opened as they approached it. Inside was a room that was larger than Jake's entire quarters on the Liberty. The ceiling was high and curved with windows that showed the stars outside. Furniture that looked grown rather than built was arranged around the room. "This is too much," Jake said. "I don't need anything this fancy. Her Majesty insists that all guests be treated with honor." Zark replied. "There are clothes in the closet that should fit you. The food station can provide meals that humans find acceptable. If you need anything else, simply speak aloud and the room systems will respond." Jake set his bag down on what he assumed was a bed, though it looked more like a large flower that had been carved from crystal. "When will I meet the Queen?" he asked. "Her Majesty will send for you when she is ready. It could be in a few hours, or it could be tomorrow. Royal schedules are difficult to predict." After the guards left, Jake explored his temporary home. The bathroom had facilities that were clearly designed for humans, which meant someone had planned carefully for his visit. The closet contained clothes that were similar to human formal wear, but made from materials that felt like silk and looked like starlight. Jake sat down in a chair near the window and stared out at the stars. He could see human ships in the distance, tiny compared to the alien vessels around them. He wondered if anyone on those ships knew where he was or what was happening to him. The food station was easier to use than he had expected. He spoke to it in English, and it provided him with a meal that tasted almost exactly like food from Earth. As he ate, Jake tried to prepare himself mentally for meeting alien royalty. What would the Queen be like? Would she be as tall and intimidating as her guards? Would she speak English, or would he have to rely on translators? What questions would she ask him and what answers would she expect? Jake was finishing his meal when he heard voices in the corridor outside his room. He moved closer to the door to listen. The voices were speaking in the Kethran language, but he could hear his name mentioned several times. The door chimed and then opened. Captain Zark entered, followed by an alien Jake had not seen before. This one was older than the others with silver markings on his skin and robes that seemed to be made of liquid metal. "Lieutenant Morrison," Zark said, "this is Lord Chancellor, advisor to Her Majesty. He wishes to speak with you before your audience." Lord Chancellor moved with the careful grace of someone very old but still powerful. When he spoke, his voice was deeper than the other Kethrons Jake had met. "Lieutenant Morrison, I hope you are comfortable in our accommodations." "Yes, sir. Thank you. Everything is very impressive. I have come to prepare you for what you will experience when you meet Her Majesty. The throne room of the Queen is unlike anything in human experience. Do not let it overwhelm you." Jake nodded. "I'll try to stay focused." "Good. Now, I must ask you some questions about your military service. Please answer honestly and completely." The Chancellor asked Jake about his training, his previous assignments, and his family background. The questions seemed routine until he started asking about specific battles during the Plague Wars. "Tell me about your actions at Kepler 442b, said. Jake was surprised. That had been a minor engagement early in the war. "We were part of an evacuation force. We helped get civilians off the planet before the plague could spread there. And at the Vegas station incident, we rescued survivors from a research station that had gone silent. And at Proxima Station," Jake took a deep breath. "Everyone seemed interested in that particular battle. My ship was severely damaged while protecting civilian transports. We rammed an enemy vessel to buy time for the evacuation." Lord Chancellor was quiet for a long moment, studying Jake with his large, dark eyes. "Lieutenant Morrison," he said finally, "tomorrow you will learn why Her Majesty has summoned you. What you discover may change your understanding of recent history. Are you prepared for that possibility?" Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "I'm not sure anyone can be prepared for something like that, sir." "Perhaps not, but I believe you will handle the truth with the same courage you showed in battle." The Chancellor left without saying anything else. Jake was alone again with his thoughts and his growing anxiety about what the next day would bring. Jake woke up the next morning to soft music coming from somewhere in the walls of his room. The bed had been surprisingly comfortable, though he had slept poorly due to nervousness. Through the large windows, he could see the sun of this star system rising behind one of the palace spires. He had just finished breakfast when Captain Zark arrived at his door. "Lieutenant Morrison, Her Majesty, will see you in 1 hour. Please dress in the formal clothes that were provided for you." Jake's hands shook slightly as he put on the alien formal wear. The clothes fit perfectly and felt more comfortable than his human uniforms. The material seemed to adjust to his body temperature automatically. When he was ready, Zarth led him through different corridors than the ones they had used the day before. These passages were wider and more decorated with paintings and sculptures that showed the history of the Karen Empire. Jake saw scenes of space battles, alien worlds, and ceremonies involving creatures he did not recognize. They passed through several checkpoints where guards examined identification and scanned them with devices that hummed quietly. Each checkpoint had more elaborate decorations than the last. "The security seems very tight," Jake observed. "Her Majesty's safety is our highest priority," Zark replied. "The throne room contains technology and artifacts that are priceless to our civilization." They entered a waiting area where several other aliens sat in chairs arranged around the walls. Some wore official-looking robes while others appeared to be military officers. All of them stared at Jake with obvious curiosity. "It is unusual for outsiders to have private audiences with the Queen," one of them said to Jake in accented English. "You must be very important to your people." Jake shook his head. "I'm just a lieutenant. I don't understand why I'm here either." This seemed to surprise the alien even more. He spoke to the others in their own language, and soon they were all looking at Jake with expressions he could not read. A door at the far end of the waiting room opened, and Lord Chancellor appeared. "Lieutenant Morrison, Her Majesty, will see you now." Jake followed the Chancellor through the door and into a corridor that was even more impressive than the ones before. The walls here seemed to be made of solid crystal that showed moving images of distant galaxies and nebula. The ceiling was so high that Jake could barely see it in the soft light. "Remember," said as they walked, "speak truthfully and show respect, but do not be afraid. Her Majesty values honesty above all else. They stopped in front of massive doors that were at least 20 foot tall. The doors were covered with carvings that seemed to move and change as Jake watched them. Guards in the most elaborate armor Jake had seen yet stood on either side.